and welcome to GroupOne Background Screening's first of many webinars. My name is Caitlin Ellis, and no, that wasn't me playing the piano, but I am the GroupOne Marketing Coordinator, and we have today speaking with us our very own David Graves. He is the sales representative here at GroupOne, but prior to working here, he worked for more than 20 years in HR, and he's here to tell us some of his HR horror stories and how he learned and overcame each situation. Our webinar today is called My Top 10 HR Horror Stories. David?
Thank you, Caitlin. Good afternoon. My name is David Graves, and I will be your speaker today. And no, it wasn't me playing the piano either. Welcome to the first of a series of educational webinars GroupOne Background Screening will be providing for our clients in 2020. We hope that these webinars are going to be educational for you as HR professionals and helpful as we at GroupOne are looking for more ways that we can work together with you to provide you with information that helps make all of our jobs easier. For those of you that don't know me, I am the sales representative for GroupOne. I'm sure I've met many of you over the years at conferences we've attended. Prior to GroupOne, as Caitlin mentioned, I worked for 20 years or more in HR. Many of the stops along the way put me working at different companies in many different industries in human resources. As I'm sure you can relate to, I have experienced many HR nightmares during my career. Today, I'd like to provide you with some of the more extreme examples and the solutions I was able to come up with to solve the incidents. Or, as we are going to call them today, Caitlin, my top 10 HR horror stories. There are several reasons why I'm going to relate these stories with you today. Perhaps foremost, here at GroupOne, we want you to know that you are not alone. We've been there, done that, got the t-shirt, and we're available 24/7 to give you assistance, offer helpful insights, and provide solutions to your HR needs. Now, in HR, there are never any easy solutions in the workplace. But by providing these extreme examples, we hope to provide ideas and strategies that you can implement in your own workplaces. Bottom line, perhaps my own HR horror stories will allow you to avoid making HR horror stories of your own. By learning from my hard-earned wisdom that's learned hard over the years, and I've made lots of mistakes along the way, and believe me, I made lots of them. Please note that after the presentation, we will open the floor for question and answer time. So, with that being said, let's get started. Please note that the names of the employees and companies have been omitted, but these are absolutely true HR horror stories. HR horror story number 10, the Phantom Truck. My number 10 top 10 HR horror story happened when I first began my career in human resources working for a temporary staffing service for banks and credit unions. Often we would hire bank tellers or bank staff for employees that were out on leave or on vacation. Banks liked our services because we would cover any loss that was incurred by one of our employees. In this role, I remember one of the scariest moments of my career, or as we will call it, the Phantom Truck. One day, one of our tellers had a loss, a giant loss of over $8,000. Now, from time to time, we would have losses with our tellers, maybe $25 here or there. But never a loss that was this high. This was a high dollar loss. As was our policy, our company covered those losses, which was an HR horror story of its own. But after the loss, it was obvious, and doing a little bit of investigation, we were able to figure out that the teller had taken the money from his drawer. However, in speaking with that teller, who was now an ex-employee by this point, we were able to get to the bottom of the story, and he confessed that he had taken the money. Now, we reported this back to the bank just to see what they wanted to do, if they wanted to pursue some kind of criminal charges. But at this point, the bank had no interest in moving further because they had already been compensated by us for the loss. But not long after, in our discussions with this ex-employee, and then with a little bit of persuasion and creativity on our part, we were able to instill a little bit of fear in this young man and let him know that we might be interested in pursuing some legal action of our own. Anyway, this was able to bring a silver lining to the story. The ex-employee then agreed to compensate us by donating the only thing he had left of value, which was his truck. And so we were able to get him to sign the truck over to our company, and then we took it down to the wholesaler and was able to sell it. And basically, he gave us his truck, and this was in Texas, no less, Caitlin. So we took that down to the wholesaler, able to trade it in, and we covered almost the entire loss and brought a silver lining really to our story. Now, this was a very odd and a very strange story, but I learned something from the experience that is valuable to this day. One of the greatest things I learned from this experience was to never panic when something like this horrifically happens. Keep calm and always work towards coming up with a creative idea, thinking outside the box to overcome a situation. Because when you stay positive, you keep calm, it allows your mind to be able to think creatively and come up with solutions to help you in difficult times like this. HR horror story number 9, the ghost who called into work. While working for a temporary staffing service, I had placed an employee at a neighborhood bank. Now, it was not uncommon for us to get messages in the mornings when employees had called in sick. We would then get those messages and relay those messages on to our clients to let them know that the employee was not going to be reporting for work that day. One morning, I received one such message like this from a family member of one of our employees who told me that their son had passed away and would not be working for us anymore. Of course, saddened by this news and wanting to check in with the family to offer my condolences, I immediately called the family. I like Damien, and I'll call him his name Damien, but I was disturbed to hear of his sudden passing. So I picked up the phone, I called Damien's house, the phone rang, person picked up and said, "Hello," and then I was saddened because I recognized the voice, and this was the voice of a dead man. It was Damien that was on the phone, and I said, "Hello?" And I was like, "Damien, I thought you were dead." Anyway, he sounded as confused as a ghost, and then he had realized then that he was caught in his lie. Well, Damien immediately hung up the phone in embarrassment, and we immediately, in turn, completed his termination paperwork. I learned from my encounter with Damien to never be surprised at what an employee might say or do. And just when you think you've heard or seen it all in human resources, and most of you that are listening can relate to this, every day in human resources is a new day of the unexpected and the crazy when it comes to HR. But it also makes working in human resources probably one of the most enjoyable jobs in the world because it never gets boring, and it always makes for a new adventure when you work in human resources. HR horror story number 8, the smell that wouldn't die. On occasion, as an HR professional, I was faced with unpleasant tasks, if not dirty jobs, and one of these was being the person that was selected to let one of our employees know that he had a dreaded hygiene issue. It had come to the attention of human resources one day that a gentleman working for us was stinking up the office, or as one coworker said, he smelled like he hadn't bathed in weeks. Employees were complaining and said he had become so offensive that they were literally having a hard time working around him. So I had to call this young man into my office, and I called him in privately and explained to him the need to bathe and use deodorant, probably the hardest thing I've ever had to do. Now, this wasn't the only time this ever happened. I actually had this happen another time, and in this situation, I was working for a transportation company, and the gentleman in need this time was driving a shuttle bus for one of our clients. In this situation, though, he explained that he had an allergic reaction to antiperspirants, and so he wasn't using deodorant. But I was able to sit down, work with this young man, and we did a little bit of research. I was able to help him find an organic deodorant that didn't have the chemical in it that was causing him to have a chemical reaction or allergic reaction to it. And so we were able to figure it out for him. But over my entire career, I've had to do this on a couple of occasions, and I must say this has probably been the most awkward and uncomfortable situations a human resources professional will ever face. But what I learned from the experience was to always put yourself in the other person's shoes. It goes a long way toward your understanding of others in your workplace by empathizing with the employees who work at your company, and then trying to recognize how they might feel, how they might perceive what you say, and then how they might respond to what they're being told. Always handle private matters in private, and then always be tactful in embarrassing situations like this one. Because at the end of the day, your employees are going to respect you more for it, and it's going to make for a more trusting environment where everyone in your company loves to work. HR horror story number 7, The Beauty and the Beast. Sometimes it's a requirement of human resource professionals to end the dreaded office romance. Actually, this tale was a little bit before my HR career. I was working in a fast food restaurant as a drive-through cashier. One day, much to my shock, I noticed a manager, and we'll call this manager the Beast in this story, and a young female coworker who decided that they deserved a break that day, and they entered into the manager's car where they took a very long and, shall we say, Caitlin, a steamy break. Well, it just so happened that the security camera was also pointed at that manager's car near the drive-through entrance. And it was at this time early in my career when I realized that every employee has a responsibility that no matter how hard it might get or how hard it is to do, you've got to stick up and do the right thing to report things when you see something that's not done right. So anyway, a little scared to do so, but I finally reported this Beauty and the Beast at the risk of being retaliated against. Unfortunately, that day, or at least after they looked into it, the manager lost his job. But I learned a valuable lesson in understanding how employees must feel when they're faced with uncomfortable circumstances like this of sexual harassment. I realized that it must be difficult for them to be able to speak up, being kind of scared. The young lady who was potentially a victim that day was not the one who reported the incident. Rather, it took someone that was willing to stand up and tell management about an unacceptable behavior they were seeing. And I just wanted to talk to our HR people and let them know that, sometimes you as an HR professional, you're going to have days when it might seem like it's easier to look the other way, but don't do it because your employees count on you to be the one to stand up for them to do the hard things. And after all, it's you that represents not only the executives inside your organizations, but you also represent the line staff and the administrative support employees. And it's you that they look to advocate for them and always have their best interest in mind at all times. HR horror story number 6, A Nightmare on HR Street. Sexual harassment is not the only time that you'll have to stand up for your employees. There are other instances of harassment. The next HR horror story, which I'm going to call A Nightmare on HR Street, happened while investigating one such incident in my workplace. Now, reporting sexual harassment incidents or any other investigation is no walk in the park. This particular incident was terribly awkward because in this case, the employee who wanted to report the harassment was doing so against the HR director of the company, who was also my boss. So you can imagine that would have been very difficult. I immediately recalled all of my training for such incidents, saying to myself, David, stick to the process. So I took notes and asked all the right questions, Meanwhile, my boss kept looking through the window and trying to use sign language to figure out, what the heck was going on inside the office. And all I could do was think, man, what a nightmare. I remember feeling so uncomfortable because not only was she my boss, but she was also part owner of the company. Turns out the employee did not have a valid reason for the complaint. The claim was unsubstantiated. It was just basically a disgruntled employee that was upset. But I learned something that was valuable that day, that no matter how weird, no matter how unsubstantiated, no matter how stressful it might become inside your workplace, never lose your cool. Always remember your training and stick to the process, because the process will always guide you and keep you on track. And if you don't already have processes in place now, write them down, get them documented, and be prepared so that when something awkward, crazy, and unexpected happens in your workplace, and believe me, it will, you'll be able to refer back to your processes. You'll thank yourself because you'll be prepared when that day comes. HR horror story number 5, silence of the riff. Now, one of the worst feelings a human resource professional will ever feel is when their company experiences a reduction in force. This is especially painful when many of the workers have been at the company for a very long time. And as is usually the case in a RIF, through no fault of their own, the employees of the company are faced with being reduced so that the company can try to survive a tough financial circumstance. Now, my first experience of a RIF was having to quietly separate employees into 2 separate rooms. Of course, the first room was given the news that their jobs were going to be safe, and the other room was delivered the bad news to find out that today was going to be their final day. Throughout the years of my HR career, I was able to grow a very thick skin, the kind of thick skin, as you know, that you need in HR to succeed in your profession. But I was humbled by dealing anytime with one of these reductions in force. Each time it reminded me that no one's guaranteed another day of work. We should all appreciate our jobs, do our very best work every day, and stay humble, because except for the grace of God, we could be the one in that silent room being told that today is our final day. Now, I hope that you never have to experience a reduction in your workplace. However, tough times are just a part of life, right? What I hope more is that you will be the kind of HR leader in your organization that others can count on to lead them with strength and dignity, and always keep a humble attitude, especially when things get rough. HR horror story number 4, Project Hell. Now, once in a while, you're given a project from hell, or at least it seems that way. I was given one of these type of projects years ago when I was asked by my company to do a reconciliation of the company's benefit plans. And so in my role as an HR generalist, I had always been expected to have a broad knowledge and understanding of HR, knowing how to do things such as payroll, knowing how to do employee evaluations, recruitment, talent acquisition, and terminations. But benefits, I knew how to do most things. I knew how to do the open enrollment each year. I knew how to help employees with their insurance forms. I can help them complete their 401k plan and answer any questions about benefits. But benefits have never been my strength. They still aren't. And so I was given to be what I called this project from hell when I was asked to complete one of the longest, most excruciating, tedious tasks of measuring the benefits of each employee against the billing of our benefits plan for several years. And I was expected to do it in a relatively short amount of time. What I found was that my greatest lifesaver was having people on my team I could count on for help, who were able to offer their expertise in the project. And over the years, I've learned, always surround yourself with people that are great people, Always stick to the project at hand, and no matter how difficult, don't ever be afraid to ask for help, especially when you feel like you're in over your head. And when in doubt, stay in your lane when it comes to your profession. Stick to where your sweet spot is and do what you do best. HR horror story number 3, Frightmare. Now, there is nothing that will wake you up in the middle of the night quite like being in charge of payroll. Covered in a cold sweat, you awaken to the terrified thought that you might have forgotten to pay all of your employees. I remember having this nightmare many times over the year. Fortunately, as I breathe a sigh of relief now, it never actually happened, but what I can say is that such a responsibility taught me to always be cautious, always mark my calendar with reminders so as not to forget details. And as a general rule, I tend to write things down and enter them into my Outlook calendar, and I don't forget things often, but it's not because I have a great memory. Rather, it's because I set reminders in advance to keep things on track so I don't forget important dates and deadlines. Now, sadly, the Frightmares still occur from time to time, but not as often as they used to, especially now that I'm no longer responsible for handling large payrolls for the employees of the company. HR horror story number 2, I worked with a zombie. I remember a very odd moment at the office as I walked down the hallway one day, and I noticed one of our workers with their head down on the desk. Now, I did a double take. I walked towards the young man to see what was happening. Was I working with a zombie, I thought to myself, or has he fallen asleep? Fortunately, it turns out it was the latter. At the time, I was still new in HR and I wasn't exactly sure what to do, so I walked over, tapped him on the shoulder to wake him up. The man was groggy and he finally came to, incoherent, and then he started to explain to me, basically I'm under the prescription of my doctor and I'm under this prescription and it's causing me to be sleepy and drowsy on the job. And then I didn't know exactly what to do. As I said, I was new in my position in HR, so I went to the HR director and we decided that with reasonable suspicion, we were going to send him for drug and alcohol testing. Sadly, the young man failed the test and we terminated his employment, but I learned some valuable lessons over that day, and I learned that over the years in human resources to always at first give the benefit of the doubt to your employees. I could have easily rushed to a conclusion, I could have made an assumption, but instead we just stuck to the process. We insisted that he take the testing for drugs and alcohol, and then we let the results of the test help us make the best and right decision. Sticking to the process, it ends up taking the guesswork out of your circumstances where you need to have your best judgment. And you never want to be wrong, especially when you think you might be working with a zombie. HR horror story number 1, the skeleton in the closet. Working for a background screening company such as GroupOne, I would be remiss if I didn't share a shocking story when I unexpectedly discovered a skeleton in the closet. I've been asked many times in my career when doing job interviews by the candidate, and they might ask something, "Sir, how far back do you go in looking at my background history?" And I would later jokingly tell my coworkers, not the candidate, I'd say, "We go all the way back." Anyway, I've learned now, working for a background screening company, that on a background check, typically a misdemeanor will go back about 7 years on someone's history, and a felony will stay on that person's history for a lifetime. But the most shocking moment in my career related to background screening was when I interviewed an older lady for a position working at a bank. She was very likable and a very decent lady. She made a great impression in the interview, and to me, she appeared to be the perfect person for the job. And so I offered her the position pending the results coming back of the background check. Once the background check had come back, it turns out she had a murder charge on her record. That's right, a murder charge, and it freaked me out because I had never seen that, never expected to see that on a background check while working there. Anyway, it turns out the lady, she had served her time, of course, but the policy of a bank is that they could not hire a felon for the bank. And so anyway, I was shocked by the unforeseen skeleton in the closet, especially when this lady seemed to be like the perfect person for the job. Then I had to share the news with this lady who had a murder charge on her record, and believe me, that was going to be a horror story in of its own. I mean, how would she take the news, right? So anyway, I strategically chose to deliver it the best way possible, not in person, but over the phone. Anyway, she sadly took the news very sadly, but she understood the bank's position. I learned something valuable, though, that day, too, is that you never want to judge a person simply by their appearance. Background checks, as well as drug tests, are very valuable tools in helping you to hire the right person for your company. However, at the same time, depending on the crime and what your policies are, everyone deserves a second chance. People have tough experiences and circumstances in life, but if they've paid their dues and they're qualified for the position, they deserve at least consideration for the job. I hope today you've enjoyed these top 10 HR horror stories, and I'm certain that you have had some HR horror stories of your own that are equal, if not better, than these. As I said earlier, in human resources, every day is something new. There's never a boring day, and there's always something to be unexpected. It just goes along with the territory. Now, we would like to open up the floor for questions. So if you'd like to share a question with us, please go ahead and put it there inside the question box on the screen. Or if you have one of your own HR horror stories that you would like to share and maybe what you learned from it, we would love to hear those as well. I'll turn it back over to Caitlin, and she can lead us through those.
Yes, David, thank you. We do have a couple questions here from our audience. The first question is, what kind of measures do you think should be taken in the workplace with the coronavirus scare?
Wow, that's a very good question, and yeah, relevant to today. Well, obviously with the coronavirus, you're going to want to be very sensitive to all the employees. You don't want to cause a panic inside your office. Now, I know a lot of offices right now are starting to consider having people work mobile from home, and so you might want to look at your policies for that. And obviously there's some hygiene things to consider, such as making sure that you're providing the hand sanitizers around the office, making sure if people are sick that they know that they should stay home, not report back to work. But anyway, just kind of keeping your office healthy and safe, but at the same time, just making sure that, and also I guess just shaking hands and things, maybe more to do fist bumps and that kind of thing around the office, but just using your common sense, especially if you're sick, stay home. If you're sick, get to the doctor. I know a lot of people don't even go to the doctor. They'll just say that they'll wait it out. But yeah, see your medical professional. Those are probably some ideas.
Okay. What is your process or training for dealing with harassment cases?
Well, that's a long, involved question, and there's probably a lot of pieces to that puzzle. But I'll provide maybe a few tips that maybe HR professionals could follow when doing a harassment investigation. Probably the first thing is just making sure that any complaint that somebody makes inside your organization, make sure that your supervisors are trained properly to report any complaint, even if they think it's minor. Make sure your anyone who comes in your office, if they make a complaint, even no matter how minor you might think it is, address the complaint. And it's the worst thing you can do is to kind of look the other way or not address it. Initiate the investigations as soon as possible. Time is probably the greatest enemy that you have when you're doing an investigation. People tend to forget important details over time, and then people also embellish stories over time. So gathering the information as soon as possible is key. Another aspect of conducting an investigation is make sure that the people making the complaint are kept safe from retaliation. It's important to communicate clearly to the alleged harasser, the witnesses, the supervisors, anybody that's involved, that any form of retaliation will not be tolerated. And probably one of the greatest tips I can make is that when you're doing the actual investigation is don't make assumptions. Get all the facts without taking the side of one side or the other. Otherwise, you're already made up your mind from the beginning, and it's going to skew how you do your investigation. Bottom line, though, is that whenever an employee comes to you and expresses a small gripe or a complaint, no matter how trivial you might think it is, never turn a blind eye to it. You might be tempted to look the other way, but you as an HR professional, you're the one that's legally required to look into the matter and engage in a prompt and thorough investigation. That's kind of a long answer for that.
All right. Well, the next one we have here is, so I know it's never easy dealing with reduction in force, but in your story, did you have any disgruntled employees? If so, how did you handle them?
Yeah, I'm sure we did. I'm sure we had disgruntled employees. Nobody likes to lose their job, but to avoid having employees being upset, I think probably the most important part of it is just being as transparent as you can be as possible. Probably the biggest mistake that I've seen over the years is that executives at that level sometimes are embarrassed maybe that the company's not doing well financially, and so they avoid communicating with the employees because they just don't want the employees to know, kind of what their financial situation is. Plus, it's embarrassing to have to nobody wants to let their employees go. But I think employees are more mature than maybe many people give them credit for. I think employees appreciate being told the truth. They don't need things to be sugar-coated. They just want to hear what's going on, what's happening. And I don't know. I think to help the employees in a situation like that, you help them as much as you can, as much as possible. I think letting the employees know that you're going to give them a good reference so that when they go to apply for other jobs, they will have that in their corner. Also, if you start looking, maybe you know of some other opportunities that you could suggest to them that help them to find another job quickly so that they're not out of work for a long time. And also let them know such things as, they're going to want to know that day that they're being let go, like, what do I do about my final check? When will I receive that? So letting them know that. What about their benefits plan? They're going to want to know, how do they continue their benefits, especially if they've got family that they need to cover on their insurance. Also, what do you do about their 401k plan? They're going to want to know how to handle that. So, but at the end of the day, the most important, I think, is just be as transparent and as helpful as you can with that situation.
Okay. In your zombie story, is it always an immediate termination if an employee fails a drug test?
Not always, of course. In some cases, as was this case, in the case of prescription medications, an employee may first get a positive result from a drug test. However, the MRO or medical review officer, they're going to do more analysis. They're going to ask the candidate more questions. They may send the candidate or have the candidate come back in for more testing if they feel like it's necessary. I'll say this, though, that be aware of your state's laws where the employee works, because these laws are ever changing right now, especially in states which are legalizing the use of marijuana. And also make sure that your policies are up to date and that you're clear of, what your company's expectations are in relationship to your drug policy.
Okay. So when you do a background check, do you recommend to your client if a person should be hired?
Tell me the question one more time.
When you do a background check, do you recommend to your clients if a person should be hired?
Oh, absolutely not. Yeah, the background checks that we provide at Group One, we provide that helpful information so that the HR professional can make that decision. That's totally up to you. We do provide inside our system some helpful tools. Should you make a decision not to hire somebody based on something that's found on a Group One background check, we have the adverse, pre-adverse letters that are provided. They pre-populate inside the system. But we expect you as the HR professional to mail those out and get that information. We expect you as the HR professional to make your own decisions to whether or not to hire somebody. Good question.
Okay. And the last one we have here, what are some things people need to look for when shopping for a background screening company?
Yeah, there's probably a lot of things to look for when you're shopping for a background screening company, but probably the first thing that I would look for is the experience of the company. I mean, look and see how long has the company been in business. This is going to tell you a lot about the company because it's going to tell you what the level of experience is of the researchers that work for the company, how long and what kind of experience they have, and how long have they been doing it as far as processing and handling sensitive information like a background check. Next, I'd probably say look at pricing, and not only pricing, but what's included for the price inside the searches that the background screen company is doing for you. Many times I have new clients or potential new clients call and they say they're getting a very low price for the background checks they're doing. And then I first think, man, I sure can't compete with that. But then I immediately start asking them questions about what kind of searches that they're doing. And many times, more often than not, they don't know exactly, what they're getting and what type of searches that they're running. And so if you're not sure, what kind of searches you're doing, make sure you check with your background screening company. Make sure, because you need to make sure you're getting the most thorough and the most accurate information to make the decisions that you need to make. Next is probably turnaround time and speed as far as getting your reports back. Obviously, as recruiters or you're hiring for your company, you've got a lot of pressure from managers inside the company to get people in their spots and get them hired as quickly as possible. But you don't want to rush the background check at the expense of the accuracy of the check. And then I guess I'd say finally, probably just make sure that your background screener is FCRA compliant, Fair Credit Reporting Act compliant. As with any background check, there's going to be local, state, and national laws and guidelines that are essential for you to follow. Companies that are providing background checks should not only monitor and update their processes to reflect legal changes, but have a solid, well-communicated process in place so as to reduce the risks for their clients. Good question.
All right, everyone. Well, that's all we have today. We want to thank you for attending Group One's first webinar. We hope you enjoyed it, and we hope that you'll attend our many webinars in the future. Thank you.
Thank you.